I'm recording. GCF, greatest common factor, is in section 8.5, but there is also another way to factor. All right, so let's look at example 1 together.
I gotta fix the tape. No matter what the
Got it.
All right, so let's look at example 1. We have 4 examples. We have 20 minutes. We have plenty of time. We're on D schedule today. We're on D as in dog. Okay. All right. So if your directions are asking you to factor, all right, you only know one way to factor right now, today, February the 23rd, and that is greatest common factor. That's the only way you know to factor right now, and I'm going to teach you a different way, okay? But let's pretend that we're trying to find a GCF. Let's just pretend, because that's what you're going to try first. All right, that's what you're going to try first. And this is actually what I thought those last 6 problems were, but once I pulled those papers out, they weren't. So you really could have done all 18 of those. That was my bad again. They just had 4 terms, and I just am losing my mind. But other than that, I'll be okay. So, do all the terms have an X? No. Do all the terms have a Y? No. Do all the terms have something that will go into 1, 7, 7, and 49?
Yes.
Only one, but does one ever help us? No. So this is unlike what you just did in the fact that there's not a greatest common factor among all the terms. Okay? All right. Another clue is that there are 1, 2, 3, how many terms? 4 terms. When there's 4 terms, write this down. When there's 4 terms, that is a clue that you're going to do something called grouping. Factoring by grouping. Okay? When you have 4 terms and you check to see if there is a greatest common factor among all 4 terms, and there's not, then that probably means that we're going to have to do something called factoring by grouping. All right? So the 4 terms is a clue that it may be grouping. Okay? So once we check to see for a GCF of all the terms and we realize there's not one other than 1, what you're going to do is you're going to underline the first 2 terms and you're going to underline the last 2 terms. You're going to underline the first 2 terms and you're going to underline the last 2 terms. And then you're going to pretend for just a minute that you have 2 separate problems. So let's look at the first 2 terms. That'll be your first problem. What's your GCF between the first 2 terms?
Oh, 1. Oh, 7 and 7. It just be X squared.
Okay, let's not guess. Slow down. Okay, it's just going to be X. If you want to put a 1 there, you can, but factoring out a 1 is not going to do anything. Okay, so X would be your GCF between the first 2 terms. So X times what is XY? Y. X times what is negative 7X? Negative 7. All right, do a little quick check right there. Make sure that you have backward distributed correctly. X is your GCF between the first 2 terms. You get Y minus 7 on the inside. Multiply your X back in your head. And make sure you get XY minus 7X. Okay? Now look at the last 2 terms. There should be a GCF among the last 2 terms. So what's the GCF between 7Y and 49? 7. Okay? So you're going to put plus 7, parentheses, and then you're going to backwards distribute out the 7 from the last 2 terms. 7 times what is 7Y? Y. 7 times what is negative 49? negative 7. So it's like we have these two little problems in our big problem. Going to take the GCF out of the first two, take the GCF out of the last two. We're not quite finished. I want you to look at what we have in parentheses. What do we have in both of the parentheses? Y minus 7, the same exact thing. So that is also considered a GCF. It's a greatest common factor because it's x times y minus 7 and it's 7 times y minus 7. So in your last step, you're going to factor out y minus 7. You're going to factor out the parentheses because the parentheses are going to be the same. And you're going to get y minus 7 times what is x times y minus 7. This is visual. This times what gives you this? And this times x gives you this. Good. So x goes here. It's just another GCF. Alright, you may not get it till I get to the last example. And then y minus 7 times what gives you 7 times y minus 7 plus 7. Okay? You're actually factoring out the parentheses because it is the GCF. So you factor out the y minus 7 and that leaves you with an x and a plus 7 and then you're finished. And some of you are going, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. So let's do another one. Okay? Let's do another one. And then you could go back and watch some of these if you're still really confused once we get finished. Alright, example 2. So this is what you're going to ask yourself. Self, is there a GCF among all the terms?
It could be, but it's probably not.
Okay, it's a yes or a no. Tuck, we can't have a it could be. Nope. There is not. There's not a Q in all the terms, there's not an R in all the terms, and there's not a number that will divide into 4, 8, 3, and 6 other than 1. So if there's not a GCF among all the terms, and you have how many terms? 4, then that is a clue that you are doing something called factoring by grouping. And we group the first 2 terms, we're going to do that by underlining, and we group the last 2 terms. Okay? Now, that becomes 2 separate little problems. The first 2 terms have a GCF of 4R. 2 is a common factor, but 4 is bigger than 2, so you'd have to use the 4. Okay, 4R is your GCF. 4R times what is 4QR? Q. 4R times what is 8R? Plus 2. Alright, quick check that. 4R times Q is 4QR. 4R times positive 2 is positive 8R. Go to the last 2 terms. What's the GCF between the last 2 terms? 3. So write plus 3. You always have to have the plus in front. Okay? And then what do you get when you factor out a 3 from the last 2 terms? Q plus 2. Okay? Then in this step, okay, your group should be exactly the same. What's in the parentheses should be exactly the same. So that means you have a GCF now, and your GCF is your group. And you're going to factor out Q plus 2. And you're going to be left with 4R and plus 3. Because Q plus 2 times 4R gives you the first term, and Q plus 2 times 3 gives you the last term. Factoring by grouping. That's the second of the 4 ways that we're going to learn how to factor. Okay? Now, these first 2 examples are the easy examples. Easier. And we're going to do 2 more that are going to be a little bit harder. Okay? If you'll notice, do y'all notice all the terms are positive? Positive, 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 positive. Okay, and in example 1, Positive, negative, positive, negative. We're gonna mess with the signs in the third example, and it's gonna make the problem a little bit harder. So let's look at example 3. What you did in your groups today was just factoring out the GCF. What we're doing now is we're doing something called factoring by grouping. It still involves a GCF, but it's a little bit more complicated. So again, check out all 4 terms. If they all had a GCF, you would factor the GCF out first, but they don't. Okay? So you're going to underline the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. When you get to Algebra 2, it may not be the first 2 and the last 2. It might be the first and the last, or the 2 middle terms. But right now they're going to be pretty nice to you, and it's going to be the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. What's the GCF between the first 2 terms? 2m. Okay? What do you get when you factor out a 2m? K minus 6. Y'all with me? Okay. What's the GCF between the last 2 terms? 7. So let's always do a positive 7 until we come across something that's not going to work for a positive 7. But let's do plus 7 right here. 7 times what is 42?
6.
7 times what is negative 7k?
Negative 1.
Negative 1k or just negative k. Okay? Now, this one is different because I want you to look at your groups now. Are they exactly the same groups?
No, ma'am, it's backwards.
It's backwards. Okay? So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have another line of work. You're going to keep your 2m and you're going to keep your k minus 6. But to make 6 minus k turn into k minus 6, anybody know what we're going to have to do?
Reverse distribute.
We're going to have not take out a positive 7, but we're going to have to take out a negative 7. And when you bring that negative out, your parentheses won't be backwards anymore. You'll have k minus 6. If you don't believe me, let's check from here to here. Okay? Negative 7 times k is what? You would just do this mentally. What's negative 7 times k? Negative 7k. You have a negative 7k in the original problem? Yes, you do. And then negative 7 times negative 6? Positive 42. You got a positive 42 in the original problem? Okay, so as long as you don't change anything in the original problem, you're good. I'm just making sure you understand why it's okay to take out the negative 7. Because the 6 minus k was backwards, and we needed it to be positive k minus 6. Now are our groups exactly the same? Yes. Now we can factor out the k minus 6. And what will we be left with? 2m minus 7. So we're going to have that little extra step when our group is backwards. When our second group is backwards, we'll have to go in and take out a negative there, and then it makes that group what it's supposed to be. All right, let's do one more example and we'll be finished. Everybody got 3?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, last one. Example 4. All right, so you're always going to check to see if there's a greatest common factor among all 4 terms, but there's not. And because they're 4 terms, you're going to know that this is probably grouping. And we group the first 2 and the last 2. What's the GCF between the first 2 terms? C. All right, C times what is C minus 2CD? C times 1 minus 2D. Think about that. C times 1 is C. C times negative 2D is negative 2CD. All right, what's the GCF in the last 2 terms? 4. So take out a positive 4 until you find out you should have taken out a negative 4. Just start with the plus 4 because a lot of them you can just take out the positive 4. 4 times what is 8D?
2.
2D. 4 times what is negative 4? Negative 1. And then this is where you realize, oh man, my groups are backwards. Okay? So then you're going to go back in your next step, and you're not going to take out a positive 4. You're going to take out a negative 4. And then that's going to change your last group to be what?
1 minus 2D.
Good. It's going to change the sign. So then the 1 is positive and the 2D is negative. Now your groups are exactly the same. They have to be exactly the same for you to factor out the common group. So you're going to factor out 1 minus 2D, and what are you going to be left with?
C minus 4.
C minus 4. All right, your homework tonight is on page 497. It is 5 through 8. And it's also 21 through 26. That is 10 problems. Only 10 problems. And they go with these 4 examples. If you do not practice factoring, you are not going to get it. Okay? And even if you don't practice, you probably won't remember it once you get to Algebra 2. All right?